Talk to me about growing pot. Where did you do all this, and how did you do it?
My very first time growing it, and I had no idea what I was doing about it, and I didn't have really the best seeds. It wasn't like took the best seeds. I just took some seeds and just wanted to see what that was going to be like. I didn't even really know the difference between a male flower and a female flower or anything like that. I just grew them and checked it out, and the stuff ended up having seeds, and figured out they were males as soon as they started turning into males and the plant changed. But I learned a lot about just what it took to grow marijuana, which isn't much. I thought it was going to be a really complicated thing, and I realized, pretty much, a little bit of chicken manure, some pretty good soil, and some water, and you're on your way. That next year, we were playing with Sly Stone at the Aquarius Theater, and we were so broke as a band, we really didn't have any place to stay. So the first night we stayed at Rick Griffith's house. He let the whole band come and stay. And then he says, well, you know what? I know where you guys can stay for a couple of days. He says, it's called the Hog Farm. And so he hooked us up with them. And after we played the gigs, we went to the Hog Farm, and we spent a couple of days there. Wavy wasn't there. He had just left with Pegasus for the convention. We met this guy, we called him Hog Steve. And Hog Steve was a guitar player and real interesting guy. And we hired him on the spot to be a roadie for us. And brought him back to Marin County. And Hog Steve ended up being my first partner growing it outside in the water company. And because I was working, in the band and doing stuff, he did a lot of the just butt-busting labor to clear out this little area in the back of Rosaka on Forest Knolls, just this little area. And we didn't have any water, and we had to carry water up to it.
But whose land was this?
Water company, Marin Municipal Water District.
So you were just sneaking into a remote location of
for
land
years.
Owned by somebody else.
Yeah, for years, that's how you did it, And no, at some point I got married to a school teacher, and it was completely verboten to have pot around, or growing it on the property. But anyway, we did that for a couple of years in this little thing, and we grew like maybe a pound of pot, and some of it was okay. And
this was just for your own personal consumption at the time?
We're just more trying to figure out growing pot.
Were you like, you just really wanted to get good at it for its own sake, or did you have an ambition, a goal?
Just wanted to grow some pot. It just seemed like it was a really cool thing to do, and I like smoking pot. And
you were to pot what Owsley was to acid. You wanted to have control of the product and make it good.
Yeah, wasn't even that advanced thinking. It was just some, again, some seeds and some pot. A lot of it was the fact that I ended up getting the genetics, the really good Mazzari seeds, and crossed up some of the nicer stuff that I'd had, those Michoacans and the Chiba weed with that Mazzari. And then I grew that in the patch that the picture's in, because that was kind of like the year where I had the original Afghani, I had the original Mexican, and so when you see the picture in the front, the Afghani plants are these squat, just bushy plants. In the back are the sativa plants, and they're about 14 feet tall with the thinnest little leaves and just the wispiest, but real tall plants. And then right in the middle was the very first hybrid that I'd crossed between the two of them. And we called that one First Mature because it got mature before anything else. So it was kind of a documentation of that time. Just going to the patch at before the sun came up and spending time there all day until the sun went down and it started getting dark and going back. And then when I'd harvest it, you could only carry so much. So me and my friend Hog Steve, we'd have these giant backpacks just filled with pot. And we had a friend walking within eyesight as far in front as he could, and he'd have a little bandana, and if he'd see anybody or any water company cars coming or anything like that, he'd drop the bandana and we'd jump off the road and hide, But it was usually at night, so and when they finally discovered the patch, that's when I came around the turn into this meadow to go down to the patch, and there was the sheriffs and the water company guys, and they were just sitting there in the dark waiting for me because they figured everything out. And as soon as I walked there, all the lights, all the strobes and everything came on, and I just started running and went around this turn and just jumped off the side of the road, and it was pretty steep, and I just, tumbled down there into, actually face planted into a tree, broke my glasses, I had the big bloody nose, and then they're looking for me with spotlights, and I managed to drag my backpack behind this stump of a tree and was just sitting there, and they didn't see me, and they just kept on going, and I just went down and up to the other road on the other side of the canyon and literally ran home, and that's the last I saw of that patch.
You set up somewhere else after that?
So I bought a 20-year lease in Jewel. Beautiful place, right on the creek, about a third of an acre of land. And I built a really nice greenhouse and a big music room there, and I would grow pot in that greenhouse. And that's when I genetically really started getting very focused because I had control of my environment. It was in this greenhouse but the cops were so all over it. They would come and they'd fly over the greenhouse. They'd get out into the park and get out on the edge of their helicopter with binoculars trying to see through the little air cracks in the thing to see if they could see any pot. It was freaky. And wife at the time was a school teacher, so that didn't help things.
Did you get raided?
No, the closest I came to getting raided is I had one year where I had I never had many plants, 5, 6 plants, because the greenhouse wasn't that big, and the plants got pretty big. So I had one year where this biplane, and to preface the story, one of the most effective people to bust pot growers was this old guy that lived in Woodacre that flew this biplane that volunteered with the sheriff's department to go and look for pot. And he'd get out there in the late afternoon when the sun got low, where you could actually really make all those color distinctions. In the later afternoon, pot plants just glow in that late light. And then he'd fly this biplane 30 miles an hour. I mean, some really slow speed, maybe 50 miles an hour. And he'd just, look all over his stuff. So I knew everything about him. I knew where his plane was, everything. We all did. He was that was bad news.
But he never made you?
I think he was instrumental in busting another little patch that friends of mine had. But one day I was out there, and all of a sudden this biplane shows up, and it just starts circling my property, and it's just going and going and going over my greenhouse and just over and over, and all of a sudden somebody comes out, and I can see that the person's got a camera and they're taking pictures. So I'm thinking, oh my God, my wife will get fired if I get busted for pot here. I'm going to have to get rid of all this pot. And it wasn't ready to harvest. But I just panicked and I dug up all the plants, all the root balls, everything. I took it down to Platform Bridge Road and just threw it in the creek. It literally took all day. And I mean, I was just, in a state of panic about the whole thing. And then later that afternoon, my sister comes walking down my driveway and she says, "Did you see me up there? My friend that owns a biplane took me to your house so I could take pictures of it." but it kind of illustrates the severity of growing pot back then, because if you cared about somebody and it was a problem, it was your obligation to get rid of the pot.
Yeah,
I was hippie in spirit, but actually I wasn't a hippie as far as I didn't go that far.
This is your sort of living archive of seeds and stuff was in the form of living plants that you were moving around?
Oh, yeah. You would have to take cuttings and keep plants alive. And back in those days, there was no real lights or anything, so you had to get aquarium lights because those would keep plants alive. And once I realized that I had some pretty good varieties going, then every year at the end of the year, I would take cuttings off of them and I'd keep them alive under these aquarium lights for the next year till I could get them outside to revitalize them again for another year. And then eventually they'd get all healthy and I'd get my crop and take cuttings. And I've done that with these varieties for 45 years. So of 2 strains of marijuana, just going and going and going every year, no matter where I was, no matter what I did. And, they've almost died so many times. But they've kept going. And the volcano is an interesting thing because every year when I take cuttings, I usually take maybe 10 cuttings. And then before I finalize the cutting that I want to keep under lights for the whole year, I flower them out again because these things move. They genetically move and go in different directions. So out of 10 plants, you might only have 2 or 3 plants that are the same plant that you took cuttings of, just because the environment's so different, the lights are so different, the conditions just make the plants evolve or morph or whatever you want to call it. So in that process over the years, some of these plants have turned into really unique things unto themselves that were very different from the volcano, even though they were cuttings of the volcano. So I'm always doing 2 things. I'm always preserving the original genetics, and I'm also exploring how they've morphed along, and if there's any of those cuttings that I want to keep to see where they're going to go.